In this video, we're going to use some more advanced tools to make our shapes that you'll put together to make your monster. And then one more handy tool for creating some more dimension with your monster. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in to this first tool. And this first one's called the Curvature Tool. So I'm going to go over here and select it. Now, my hint for you here is that before you start tracing a shape, is that I like to change the fill to none, and I like to change the outline, the stroke, to a different color than what I'm actually tracing. Okay, so I have that selected, and now I'm just going to get started. And every time I click with the curvature tool, it's going to make a anchor point. Okay, and then when I make another anchor point, it's going to make a path between them. And I am just going to go and make a anchor point at the inside and outside of every one of these shapes. And notice that it's not perfect. It is not perfect, and I know that. I'm just going to go back and fix that later. And so that's kind of what I want to do. And you're probably like, you did a terrible job, but did you notice how it kind of fixed itself? Now, after you do this, you can come back and click and drag on paths, and you can actually change them. Okay, so that's what's really cool, is that you can actually go back and move the actual points with the curvature tool, and you can move the path, okay, and change kind of the curve and whatnot to make it perfect. So I'm just clicking and dragging the paths to kind of change the curve between. And if you don't get the curve that you want, you could just kind of move the anchor point. So that's really cool. Okay, so that's the curvature tool for you. And notice it's pretty simple. Okay, but notice that it's not perfect. Okay, and that's why I actually like to go old school and use the pen tool, which is very hard to use. And a lot of people try to avoid it right away when they first get into Illustrator. But I think after you get started with this, then everything's possible after that. So I'm going to do the same thing with the pen tool. So I'm selecting the pen tool, and I'm just going to click and make just anchor points on the inside and outside of curves. Okay, and I'm purposely not even going. Some people like curve as they go, and I don't. I just like to do it at the end. And I'm going to go back to the very first point that I made, and notice that when I do that, I see this little circle, and that stands for the genesis point, x equals 0, y equals 0. And when I see that and I click, it now turns my path into a closed shape. All right. Now I wanted to point out some things up here that you can come up here and control some of your anchor points with the application bar, and you can select some anchor points and make them curved or pointy. You can get rid of some anchor points, you can cut and stuff like that. But I want to direct your attention to that little flyout menu, and if I click and hold, we can see that I can add anchor points, delete anchor points, and then I'm going to move into where it says anchor point tool. Okay, so it looks like this open V. And I'm going to go back to my anchor points, and I'm just going to click on an anchor point, and when I click and drag, notice that it has these little handlebars that come out, and now I can click on these handlebars and I can move them around. Okay, and so I'm just going to go back to each of these paths and just click and drag and perfect my curves. And I just like, you can use the curvature tool and kind of as a shortcut, but I actually think that with the pen tool, I get a little bit more accuracy. I just feel like sometimes I feel like I can't like override some things that the curvature tool is doing. I'm clicking and dragging till I get my little ghost shape monster shape that I want. And the cool thing too is that you have like these handlebars between each one that you can kind of, and then this isn't perfect. I could go back and really spend some time to make it perfect. And remember that with my direct selection tool, I can click and drag and move points as well. So that's a possibility as well. So that is the pen tool. I also just wanted to mention that there's some other tools under there's the smooth tool, which is under the shaper tool. So I can select this smooth tool, and that allows you to select a path. And with the smooth tool, it kind of looks like a striped pencil, and I can click and drag over a path, and that lets me like actually smooth out any jagged kind of edges. So that's kind of like a last resort, like, oh, I can't just make it, you know, the way that I want it. You could always use the smooth tool to kind of go back and try to smooth some edges out. Notice that actually worked pretty well. Okay. So that is the pen tool and the anchor point tool. I do wanted to point out that you could go and play what's called the Bezier game. And this is a really great game to learn. This is not it. Bezier pen game. There we go. The Bezier game is what I want. So it's bezier.method.ac. This is what I wanted. And this teaches you how to use the pen tool better. And it's like has challenges and stages. And if you're really struggling with it, I highly recommend playing this game to get better at the pen tool. Okay. Let's move on to this last tool, which is called the width tool. And it looks like this. So I'm going to select this. And notice that I have these two, they're just paths. Okay, they're not even closed, they're just paths, they're just lines. And what I want to do is move this one to the left, and notice that it's this, you know, the size of his eyebrow. And what the width tool lets me do is it lets me actually select somewhere on a path, and I can click and drag out and control specific widths of a path. But notice that I can get really fat in some places, and I can get thin in others. So this really lets you control the line variation of a line, you know, by like instead of just going up here and adding this, you know, you're making actually a custom one here. So that looks pretty bad, but it's just kind of showing you the point of I can have a straight line, and if I want to add dimension and in depth to my character, I can use the width tool to actually make the thinness, change the thinness and thickness of those lines. All right, so that's what I have for you. And then go ahead and watch the next video when you want to know how you can set up your file to actually make your monster.